back to the Layman's Perspective, the show where I talk for too long and I need to make my videos shorter. Hopefully you guys know from the title and from previous videos, this is a spoiler review, so do not watch anything I have to say until you've seen episode 4. It'll spoil everything. Also, as this continues to be a bigger and bigger trend as we go on, I may predict things that end up being true later on, so just be aware that that might happen. Also, if you like this video, or you're just in general liking how I seem to be predicting things left and right, and generally my theories seem to be pretty good, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel to not miss my next breakdown of episode 5 next week. Okay, let's jump right in. So this episode was interesting. It is the first episode we've gotten that is not a Wanda's World sitcom story. Instead, what we're treated to is the sequence of events that lead up to where we were at the end of episode 3, outside in the real world. The first shot we get is Monica being de-snapped. Now, this entire sequence of her running around in the hospital and kind of stumbling into what just happened, I loved. The only other time we've seen the blip in the MCU has been in Spider-Man Far From Home. And while we got some good visuals, it was treated mostly as a joke in that movie, where in this scene, it's chaotic, confusing, heartbreaking, depressing, almost horrifying. It was a much more realistic look at the blip and its implications. As we see this hospital get overwhelmed and people are confused, they're trying to call their loved ones and their spouses, nobody has any idea what's going on. I loved it. We learn in this scene that sadly Maria Rambeau has died of cancer during the 5-year time gap between Infinity War and Endgame, so rip Maria. Now, I also specifically love how Monica seems to have been snapped in her sleep, because we've seen other people get snapped while awake, while conscious, and they do seem to understand that something bad is happening to them as they fade away. Whereas because Monica was asleep when she got snapped, she has no idea what's going on. To her, she fell asleep and woke back up, and she doesn't quite comprehend more than most that she died and was gone for a long period of time. She seems to jump right back into work though, because we're treated to the next shot being the ground base operations for S.W.O.R.D. We go inside, and I think it looks very similar aesthetically to the inside of S.H.I.E.L.D. that we saw in Civil War, with the large S.W.O.R.D. logo in the lobby atrium, kind of mirroring the S.H.I.E.L.D. logo that they similarly adorned the lobby with. It's an interesting couple of scenes, not the most intriguing dialogue that we've gotten, but we do learn a couple of things. For one, that this man, Tyler Hayward, is the acting director, acting, I'm assuming, meaning in place of Maria, who we learn was the founder of S.W.O.R.D., much the same way that Peggy Carter was one of the founders of S.H.I.E.L.D. We get some dialogue that seems to imply that there is indeed greater extraterrestrial space operations that S.W.O.R.D. undergoes, or at least underwent before the blip, and everyone, including Monica, as we're told, is grounded currently. We keep moving along at a pretty good pace, and Hayward tells Monica that there is a missing persons case in New Jersey that has the FBI all ruffled and worried. Now, it was pretty much confirmed that this was going on in New Jersey, but now we've gotten definitive confirmation through the highway shots that, yeah, that we're in New Jersey, this is where we are. We meet up with Agent Jimmy Woo of the FBI. We actually have met him once before as the FBI agent in Ant-Man and the Wasp, in charge of governing Scott's house arrest after the events of Civil War. So it's nice to see him again. It just makes the whole interconnected MCU universe feel well thought out and well designed, and we see different characters like that pop up. Now, the biggest shock in this scene to me was finding out that Westview doesn't exist, apparently. We knew that it was occupying a real space, and we knew, or rather, I should say we know after this episode, that they are indeed real people inside the town, but according to the local police who they talked to, the physical town of Westview doesn't exist. Jimmy Woo specifically says this is not a missing persons case, this is a missing town. I think this points to the scope of the powers going on here to be much bigger than we realize, that this entire town was created out of nowhere. I think it's also important to note that from the inside, the town looks to be this merry, cheerful, delightful sitcom-esque place, but from the outside it looks pretty shabby, pretty crappy. The first test that Monica attempts is to send a drone into the town to try and see what's going on from a distance. The aesthetic of the drone in this scene, coupled with what we later see further into the episode, is official confirmation that I was correct, that it was indeed a sword device that changed upon entering the field of the town. This happens more than once in the episode. It also happens later with the beekeeper, who I had no idea what to make heads or tails of that. Originally, we see was wearing a hazmat suit and tried to enter through the sewer of the town, also changed into the beekeeper. So this seems to be official confirmation, again, of what I and others had previously theorized, that once you enter the bounds of this reality, it changes you, or it changes whatever is sent in order to match the aesthetic of things and also to try and not rouse Wanda back to reality. After the drone disappears, Monica goes up to the field and we see the wall of what looks like cathode ray tube dots, like an old-fashioned TV, kind of indicating where the demarcation wall is. She touches it, and she gets sucked in. And we learn that this was the inciting incident that draws the greater SWORD and FBI attention. It's pretty safe to assume that this would have originally garnered their attention either way, but Monica getting sucked in was the inciting incident. We jump to 24 hours later, and we get another MCU supporting character in the form of Darcy Lewis, now an astrophysicist going to assist the SWORD and FBI teams and try to identify what's going on. If you don't remember her, she was Natalie Portman's friend from both Thor's 1 and 2. And again, just like including Jimmy Woo, it makes the universe feel more tangible, more real, that we get to see these recurring characters again. I mentioned this a little bit in my previous episode, but it does look, the SWORD base looks a whole lot like the shield base that was erected around the impact of Thor's hammer in the first Thor movie. And Darcy gets right to work. She sets up and, under prompt from a SWORD agent, immediately turns on her machines and sees that there is a tremendous amount of the cosmic background radiation coming out of this bubble. Now, this is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it's good to see Darcy flex her newly acquired astrophysics knowledge in this scene. But two, and perhaps more importantly, it definitely ties into what we've been told before, in that the Infinity Stones' origins trace back to the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang. We're told this by Wong in Infinity War. So it definitely makes sense that a cosmic background radiation reading would be very high in this situation, because we're assuming that there's either physically Infinity Stones there, or the power of Infinity Stones at play. Wanda's powers herself are derived from the Mind Stone, so maybe her powers give off cosmic background radiation. We don't know for sure yet, but it's definitely one of those three. And it's the first thing that Darcy keys in on. She also discovers there is a broadcast wavelength, as she tells Director Hayward, intertwined in the background radiation signal, and she rigs up an old school TV to the signal, and it spits out the episodes that we have been watching. Now, the show becomes very meta from here on out, which I love. My favorite superhero of all time, at least in Marvel, is Deadpool, so I'm a sucker for meta gags and meta jokes like this. All throughout the rest of the episode, you have them talking about why do they have the aesthetics of different sitcoms, who's doing this, why the hexagon shapes, this person is cast as this person has this role, all asking questions and thinking about things that me and other YouTube commentators are much the same speculating on. So I really loved that they did that. I thought it was a very layered meta commentary on how people analyze the different Marvel properties. As I mentioned before, we see an agent named specifically Agent Franklin gets dressed up in the hazmat suit and is the second physical person sent in to try and see what's going on. They sent him in subterraneously through the sewers, hoping that the boundaries of the bubble don't extend into the ground, which of course we see that they do. This scene specifically, when he's crawling through the very tight claustrophobic sewer tunnel, reminded me very much of both the sequence in the original Alien, where Dallas is in the air ducts and he's trying to find the xenomorph, and Aliens, where Bishop is crawling the length of the electrical conduit pipe to get to the satellite terminal. It's very scary and intense and claustrophobic, and it was a very good choice. I don't know if they homaged both of those movies purposefully, but that's where my mind went. We see through the limited intel and scans that they've been able to acquire and do that the boundaries of the town are in the shape of a hexagon, which has been a reoccurring shape throughout all of the episodes. I haven't really mentioned it before because I didn't really have any solid stabs or guesses as to what the hexagons meant, but it seems to definitely get more and more important as we go. We also see now that all the way back in episode 1, when it zooms out of the ending credits of the first episode, and we see that there was a mystery sword agent, perhaps, listening in and watching the episode. We're like, oh, who is this? We see now that it was actually Darcy sitting at her desk monitoring the episodes. We have Darcy and Jimmy getting very invested, as Darcy says, into the show, which again, I love how meta this is, because they're essentially parroting what we, the audience, are feeling about this show. Oh, twins, what a surprise. Oh, we love Wanda and Vision. They're so cute together. I'm invested now. I absolutely love it. We cut to Jimmy talking about how, for the FBI at least, this is a missing persons case, so they're going to go ahead with investigating what that is. And we see, as they watch more and more of the episodes, that they identify different people within the show as real people who are listed as these missing people. So that is my second prediction that has turned out to be correct, that these are in fact real people who are being warped and contorted into playing along with whatever's going on here. There are two noticeable people who are not identified as real people, and that is Agnes, which we were expecting, and interestingly, Dottie. Now, she's definitely curious in terms of her general demeanor and behavior towards Wanda. I didn't count her as a villain myself, potentially, and there is the chance that they hadn't at that point watched her scenes in the show and hadn't identified who she was, but it definitely could mean something. And then again, Agnes, of course, is not there, which we were expecting, because Agnes obviously has a greater role in the story to play. Their next move is Darcy's idea, which is to try and send another broadcast wavelength back into the bubble to see if they can communicate with them somehow. Specifically, they're going to try and beam it into one of the radios that they see in the show. This leads to the reveal that back in episode 2, the mystery man voice on the radio was actually Jimmy Woo trying to communicate with Wanda. I really love how the different perspective of this episode is filling in a lot of those blanks. They get the picture of the colorized helicopter that Wanda finds in the bush, and they, like we just discussed, speculate that this was one of the drones that they had sent in previously, being changed either to fit the aesthetic of the universe or to render it useless, which is an interesting quote from Darcy, because maybe something is trying to make sure that no one can probe into what's going on too far. We cut back to Agent Franklin crawling through the sewers, and he crawls past the little demarcation wall, and his hazmat suit is turned into the beekeeping suit that we had seen previously, and his tether turns into a jump rope and becomes disconnected. Now, seeing this from his perspective, he crawls out of the sewer, and everything, including his surroundings, him, are in color. And as it turns to reveal Wanda and Vision looking at him like we've seen in the previous episode, the world fades into black and white as the false reality changes are solidified. Interestingly, we don't see what happens to him like we saw Monica get ejected. She just says no, and we see on their end that while we see everything rewind, that whole scene being broadcast out of the bubble was redacted. So far we don't know what happened to Agent Beekeeper Franklin. We're going to have to see. The last thing that we see them watching is Wanda's altercation with Monica in the previous episode 3. All we see is Wanda advancing towards Monica in a very sinister manner, and then it immediately cuts to the credits. And they're like, oh my gosh, what the hell is that? They try and replay it on the laptop that they're recording the episodes on, and it just cuts. They can't see what happened. Darcy's immediate observation is that someone is censoring the broadcast. We don't know who, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but that is her assertion, and I definitely agree with her. We go into the episode, and we see this scene, which we had already seen in episode 3, but we see more of it. Wanda officially using her red reality warping powers. We haven't seen them visually being used like this in the show yet. She becomes very hostile towards Monica, saying, "You're not my friend, you're not my neighbor, you're a stranger, and you are trespassing here. I want you gone." And she literally shoves her through the walls of the house, through the back gate, out of the bubble like we saw. And then she very quickly uses her powers to destroy the walls and to cover up the evidence. Now, I've been seeing a lot of people saying that between this and what Monica says at the end of the episode, it's Wanda, it's all Wanda, this must mean that it's all Wanda, that she's our villain, that's what's happening, she's in complete control. I don't agree with this. I think that one of two things is happening. Either her mental state is rapidly decaying to the point where she's about to have some kind of psychotic breakdown, or she's being manipulated by someone. Someone is pulling the strings. You can even see, as soon as she gets rid of Monica, she looks confused, almost dreamlike. And we've seen that look on her face before, where she doesn't look like she knows or is aware of everything that's going on or why she's doing the things that she's doing. I think it would be way too easy and also way too underwhelming to assume that she's the villain of the show and she knows 100% what's going on, she's doing it, that's the end of it. No way. Come on, you guys. A lot of people are also saying that this episode seems to have taken a lot of the mystery of the show away, and I disagree with that also. You gotta think, this is only episode 4. We have 5 episodes left, and there are still a lot of things we don't know. How did Wanda create this bubble reality to begin with? Where did Vision come from? What's Agnes doing? Why isn't Dottie on the wall? How did Wanda have children? Why was Strucker and Hydra mentioned twice in 2 different commercials? There is a whole lot of things that we don't know what's going on. So I see a lot of people saying that. It didn't ruin any of the mystery for me. I think, again, it just gave us a lot of answers, but raised more questions in the process. We see Vision race into the room and ask where Geraldine went, and we see something this time that we didn't see last time. This was the literal shot heard round the world. Wanda turns to Vision, and it's not regular Vision, it's Vision's dead corpse circa the end of Infinity War. Wow, this really screwed me up. To be honest, I'm still thinking about it now, and it's screwing me up a little bit. That was scary. Probably the most I've been genuinely unsettled in a Marvel property so far. And I think that's because it's right on the line. Vision is a synthesoid. He's a robotic, non-organic organism. So, and we know that. We've been told that multiple times as the audience throughout the different properties. So we know, even though what we're seeing is very disturbing, that it's not the inside of a human head. If that had been a real person, I don't think that I or anybody else would have been able to watch that. His completely blank, pupilless eyes also definitely played into that too, because as you know, as they say, the eyes are the windows to the soul. And the just blank eyes and the crater in his head, wow, was I not prepared for that. Interesting to note that we also see that the Mind Stone is not in his head, just like the last time we saw him. What does this mean? Well, I think it means one of 2 things. Number 1, less likely. I think Wanda was having some kind of flashback. Monica, the whole thing that just happened with Monica shook her a little bit, brought her a couple of levels out of this fake reality, and she turned around and remembered that's what he really looked like the last time she saw him. However, number 2, and what I unfortunately think is more likely, is that this entire situation with Monica lifted her a couple levels out of the reality, and when she turned around, she saw Vision as he really currently is. I think either her powers or whoever else is pulling the strings here are genuinely puppeting and imbuing life into Vision's corpse, which, considering what we've seen happening so far, they're kissing, they're going in bed together, they're having children. That's very, very disturbing. She focuses and she blinks and she looks up again and he's normal. He's Vision again. And they sit down with the two kids and the credits roll. Now, one of my friends, shout out to Gus Cap, said something very intriguing. Now, so far in episodes 1, 2, 3, this kind of ending where they sit down and the credits roll has been very cozy, very secure. The show makes you feel very safe and warm watching it. I didn't feel that at all now. With this reveal of dead Vision, that feeling is completely gone. Now I'm looking at this scene with horror and immense discomfort, wondering what this all means and what's going on here. Wow. I thought this was really good. I loved the outside perspective of seeing new events along the timeline that we've already seen. I loved getting a more fleshed out look at the blip, at Monica's character, at S.W.O.R.D. as a whole. I think it's safe to say definitively that S.W.O.R.D. seems to be the good guys in this situation. And I don't agree with a lot of what's being said. I don't think this has ruined the mystery of the show for me. If anything, I have more questions. Why are these broadcasts sitcom themed? We still don't know that. What is Agnes doing? Her lack of confirmation of being a real people is more evidence fuel to the fire that she does have some kind of sinister / larger role. Why wasn't Dottie on the wall? What the hell was with that horrendous dead Vision scene? I'm thirsty as ever to find out more what's going on and to get more answers and to inevitably have more questions raised. I think my biggest question moving forward is now I definitely, more than I mean, going into the show, we all wanted to know what happened to Vision, what's going on, how is he alive? But this absolute stinger of a reveal has just reinforced and exponentially grown that desire. I want to know what's happening now. Is he dead? Is Wanda somehow imbuing him with life? Is she just controlling his corpse? Is someone else doing this? I really want to know, but I also can't talk about it for that much longer because just thinking about how he looked. Jesus. The other big question I have is related to Darcy's comment of someone seems to be censoring the broadcast. Who is doing that and why? It could be very easy just to think that it's Wanda who's censoring it, but again, I think that's too easy and too underwhelming of an answer. I think that we're going to find out that another entity who we haven't seen seems to be controlling what's going on, what gets out to the real world, what we see and do not see. Could it be Mephisto, like some people seem to be suggesting? I think more and more, like the more I see, that seems to be highly, highly likely, especially if Agnes is indeed Agatha Harkness. Like I said before, Mephisto is Marvel's version of Satan. If you want to know more about the character of Mephisto, again, there's a great episode by Comics Explained that goes into enormous detail about the character history, his powers and abilities, what he can do. Highly recommend it. That's about it for episode 4, you guys. Stay tuned. If you're subscribed, hit that notification bell, and you will be notified when I release my review and breakdown for episode 5 next week.